Something is breaking inside the American food system, and most households won't understand what it is until it's already too late. The warning signs are not hidden. They are sitting on every grocery store shelf, embedded in every receipt, encoded in every price tag that climbed 3, 5, sometimes 10% higher than it stood just 12 months ago. But the danger is not simply that food costs more. The real danger is structural, layered, and accelerating in ways that standard economic reporting consistently fails to capture. Across 10 specific states, a convergence of agricultural stress, supply chain fragility, labor economics, and climate-driven logistics disruption is creating a pressure system that is silently crushing household financial resilience at its foundation. To understand what is genuinely happening, you have to abandon the comfortable assumption that food price inflation is temporary, cyclical, or evenly distributed. It is none of those things. The states absorbing the hardest hits in 2026 are not random victims of a broad national trend. They are geographically, economically, and infrastructurally positioned in ways that amplify every upstream shock in the food production and distribution network. California, Texas, Florida, Arizona, Nevada, Illinois, New York, Georgia, North Carolina, and Michigan. These 10 states represent a cross-section of America that together feeds, processes, and distributes food for hundreds of millions of people, and yet each one is now caught inside a feedback loop where the cost of producing food, moving food, storing food, and selling food is rising simultaneously from multiple directions at once. The misunderstanding most households carry is that food prices rise because farmers are charging more or because grocery chains are extracting higher profits. That surface-level interpretation misses the actual engine of the crisis entirely. What is driving the squeeze in these 10 states is a compounding failure across what food systems scientists call the agri-logistics chain, the interconnected web of water availability, fuel costs, refrigeration infrastructure, labor wages, fertilizer chemistry, and transportation routing that must all function together for food to move from a field to a table at an affordable price. When any 2 or 3 of these variables stress simultaneously, prices spike. When 5 or 6 stress at once, which is exactly what is happening in 2026, the result is not a spike. It is a sustained elevation that does not correct itself through normal market mechanisms. The evidence for this is measurable and precise. In California, which produces roughly 1/3 of all vegetables consumed in the United States, groundwater depletion in the Central Valley has reached a point where irrigation costs have risen by an estimated 40 to 60% over the past 4 years, and those costs are now fully transferred into wholesale produce prices before a single truck leaves the farm. In Texas, extreme heat events have extended beyond historical seasonal norms, forcing livestock operations to increase feed consumption per animal while reducing weight gain efficiency, a biological reality that translates directly into higher beef and poultry prices radiating outward through every state that sources protein from Texas processing facilities. In Florida, successive hurricane seasons have damaged citrus and vegetable infrastructure in ways that take multiple growing cycles to repair, meaning supply gaps that were created years ago are still suppressing output in 2026. What survival-minded analysts understand, and what the average household does not, is that food price pressure in anchor state economies like these does not stay contained within state borders. Because of how the American food distribution network is structured, centralized processing hubs, long-haul refrigerated transport corridors, regional wholesale distribution centers, a production or logistics failure in California does not raise prices only in California. It raises prices across every state that draws from the same wholesale supply chain, which in practical terms means most of the continental United States feels the downstream effects of localized stress in these 10 critical nodes. The household in Michigan paying more for lettuce in February is paying a price that was calculated in a California field experiencing its 6th year of drought-level water stress. This is the escalation that makes 2026 different from previous inflationary periods. The geographic concentration of agricultural output in the United States means that simultaneous stress across multiple high-production states creates a multiplier effect on national food costs that is fundamentally nonlinear. Each additional state that enters a phase of production or logistics strain does not simply add its percentage to the national average. It interacts with every other stressed state to produce price outcomes that are larger than the sum of their individual parts. And in 2026, 10 states are stressed at once. That is not a coincidence. That is a system approaching a threshold its architects never designed it to survive. The threshold that food systems engineers have long identified as the breaking point for household financial stability is when food expenditure crosses 14% of total take-home income. Below that number, families absorb price increases through minor lifestyle adjustments, fewer restaurant visits, substitution of cheaper protein sources, reduction in branded goods. Above that number, something fundamentally different begins to happen. Households start making structural trade-offs, meaning they are no longer adjusting lifestyle preferences but are instead choosing between food and rent, between groceries and medication, between feeding children adequately and maintaining utility payments. In 5 of the 10 states under examination, California, New York, Florida, Nevada, and Arizona, median household food expenditure as a percentage of take-home income has now crossed or is mathematically approaching that 14% threshold, and the consequences of that crossing are not theoretical. They are already visible in food bank utilization rates, in pediatric nutrition clinic data, and in the purchasing pattern shifts that grocery chain analytics departments track with extraordinary precision but rarely discuss in public communications. What makes this moment scientifically significant is that the 14% threshold does not produce a gradual decline in household stability. Research in behavioral economics and household resource management consistently demonstrates that financial stress around food, the most psychologically fundamental of all expenditure categories, produces a cognitive narrowing effect that impairs long-term planning capacity. When a household is allocating an unsustainable portion of its income to food, its decision-making architecture shifts from future-oriented resource management to immediate crisis response. This is not a character failure or a cultural weakness. It is a documented neurological response to resource scarcity that was identified in controlled research environments and has since been observed consistently across populations experiencing food cost pressure. The implication for the 10 states in question is that rising food prices are not simply creating financial stress, they are systematically degrading the cognitive and organizational capacity of households to respond effectively to that stress, creating a self-reinforcing cycle of vulnerability. The analytical error that most commentators make when examining this crisis is treating it as a purchasing power problem with a purchasing power solution, meaning the assumption that wage increases or government assistance transfers will stabilize the situation if they arrive at sufficient scale. That assumption misunderstands the structural nature of what is happening. In Illinois and Georgia, where agricultural processing and food manufacturing represent significant portions of the regional labor economy, the same inflationary pressures that are raising consumer food prices are simultaneously compressing the operating margins of food industry employers, creating downward pressure on the very wages that households need to absorb higher grocery costs. This is a pincer dynamic, costs rising from one direction, income capacity constrained from the other, and it is particularly acute in states where food production and food consumption exist within the same regional economy, meaning the financial stress circulates through the local system rather than being absorbed or offset by external economic inputs. In North Carolina and Michigan, the dynamics manifest differently but produce equivalent levels of household pressure. Both states contain significant populations of rural and semi-rural households that are geographically distant from the large-format discount grocery infrastructure that urban and suburban households use to partially offset price increases through volume purchasing and store-brand substitution. A household located 40 miles from the nearest large grocery retailer cannot access the unit price efficiencies that partially insulate urban consumers from wholesale price increases. It is paying full retail price at a limited selection local store, absorbing fuel costs to travel for better pricing, or reducing purchase frequency in ways that paradoxically increase per-unit food costs because smaller, more frequent purchases carry higher price-per-ounce ratios than bulk alternatives. The geography of food access is therefore not a secondary consideration in this analysis. It is a primary amplifier of price pressure for a substantial portion of the population in these states. The survival implication of all of this is precise and urgent. Households that understand the structural nature of this pressure, that it is not temporary, not politically resolvable in the short term, and not distributed evenly across income levels or geographies, are positioned to make fundamentally different decisions about food security than households operating under the assumption that prices will normalize within a standard market correction cycle. Building caloric reserves, developing localized food sourcing relationships, understanding the nutritional density economics of staple foods versus processed alternatives, and reducing dependence on the most supply chain vulnerable food categories are not extreme measures. They are rational, evidence-based responses to a documented systemic condition. The 10 states examined here are not outliers in a stable national picture. They are early indicators of a food affordability restructuring that the architecture of the American food system was never designed to prevent.